right, everybody. So today we have a roundtable podcast with James Krieger and Eric Lee Salazar. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for
How you
having
doing?
us.
So, just to get started, as with all of these podcasts, we start with a charity donation. And so we'd all agree that today's would still go to Operation Smile, which helps children with cleft lip and palate. So, again, as always, I will have a link down below. If anybody likes the cause, feel free to donate as well. So, one of the reasons that I got in contact with you, Eric, was I saw you make a lot of posts about working with James on this with this weighted vest and how you felt it helped you. And so, can you just kind of, well, I guess first, what is your background? I think, James, a lot of people have probably seen you on here before, but could you guys both briefly just kind of give your background in this?
Yeah, I'm 15, going on 16 years personal training. So I started personal training when I was I just turned 20. So I was a personal trainer, and I've been competitive bodybuilding for now 12 years. One of my first mentors that I got started with was Lane Norton, and then Dr. Joe Klemzeski and his associate Sean McCauley, and that was now I think that was about 11 years ago. So then once I dove into the evidence base and research, and started just taking a nosedive into all the PubMed, and that was about 10 years ago. And so then I got a Facebook. I never had a MySpace or anything like that. So then I got on social media and just started doing crazy things with my bodybuilding and personal training here in Houston, Texas. And now I own my own gym. So a lot of people come down here and like to take pictures here. And I'm sponsored by Monster Energy Drink and De Novo supplements.
Awesome, man. Very cool. And you forgot to mention you have traps up to your ears.
Yeah, that too. I got some all right traps.
How are you, James?
Well, I've been in the fitness industry a long time, since like the 1990s. So I actually started in computer science, and weight training and bodybuilding was just kind of a hobby for me at the time, but it just became a really passionate hobby, and ended up switching from computer science to exercise science. Got all my degrees through there. Really kind of made my mark in the fitness industry. Really, it was on the internet, because this was late 90s and stuff. The old Mel Siff Super Training Digest, things like that. I was on there a lot, and that's how I got to know guys like Brad Schoenfeld and stuff, like years and years ago. And then started writing for a magazine called Pure Power Magazine. It was a magazine for strength and power athletes, and I was the science editor for that magazine for a long time. And then I got my degrees. I have 2 master's degrees. I had originally planned on doing a PhD, but it didn't quite work out. That's why I ended up with 2 master's degrees instead, and became the research director for a obesity management program for Microsoft employees, and I did that for a long time. Then kind of had a little bit of a break from the not a total break from the fitness industry, but I worked as an analyst for a healthcare company for a while. I did have my Weightology site going at the time, but not really to the near degree that it is now. It was just kind of a side thing at the time. And then I was a full-time day trader for a while before I came back into the fitness industry, and basically made Weightology my full-time business. And I still trade. I've actually got open positions right now as we're doing this podcast. I'm kind of just keeping an eye on them. But yeah, so yeah, now I have my website, Weightology. I have a research review. I've co-published a number of studies with Brad Schoenfeld and other people in the industry. I also have some coaching clients as well. Eric is one of them, obviously. And then, yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at now. So
Awesome. And so actually that kind of already gives me another question. Maybe Eric or both of you could talk about, you mentioned that you've been doing this for 15 years, you're a trainer yourself, you have your own gym, and yet you are working with James, right? And maybe I think some people might hear that and say, well, why would you do that? I mean, and James, you've competed, I think once or twice, right?
One time, yeah.
One time. But I think people might say like, well, if you've done this for so long, why do you have a coach? Can you just explain why even when you're really established, it's still a good idea sometimes to have somebody coaching you?
Of course, I can even bring up some situations where everything that me and James did, I would sit down, I would give him my plan of action, and he would kind of just see if it made sense on his end, and if it did, that's how we would agree with the moving forward. But anytime you get closer to a show, you're gonna have second thoughts with the low calories, the low body fat. You get a little scared, especially when you're on a high level of trying to get down to just like no body fat percentage, or you're trying to go in for a pro card, and you feel like everything's riding on this. You tend to make bad decisions in my experience. So it's always good to have a coach. Conor McGregor, Mayweather, they all have coaches, even though they're amazing athletes. So it's always good for everybody to have a coach. And the reason why I went to James, I had met James. James, when was London's personal trainer collective? Was that 2014 or 2015?
2015, I think.
Yeah, 2015. Yeah. I remember I got real blown away with his steps presentation, because I had previously in my previous shows I had already been tracking my steps, and so I had already kind of been getting a few of my clients to track their steps. And then whenever he did his presentation, it was real mind blowing. And I honestly think that James having his steps presentation kind of sparked the industry. Whether people even believe it or not that it was coming from James, just like the weighted vest right now. I mean, everyone's wearing a weighted vest, I think that it really stemmed from him and everyone just talking about steps. That became the big thing. But I mean, it's almost when him talking about steps was just like somebody finally just talking about calories. Like, oh, we can actually have a calorie budget. We have a way to actually follow something. So whenever it came to me picking a coach, since my last coach, after about 6 years, he retired into tactical firearms. And so whenever it was time for me to pick a coach, I wanted the science guy. I didn't want just what we see all the time. I mean, I'm nobody different from any other coach that trains a lot of athletes. I get that. I know what I'm doing for the most part. But I wanted someone as a mentor and someone who I already get a lot of my stuff from on Weightology. I read a lot of his articles, so I wanted someone who I can actually ask legitimate questions where he can kind of analyze to see if this makes sense or not. Should we try this? Should we go forward with this? And I remember I had asked him, I was like, hey, do you train bodybuilders? Because I don't see a lot. And he was like, yeah, I do, but I mean, just haven't had a lot come to me. And I was like, well, I think a lot of people are missing out by not having him as a bodybuilding prep coach, because they maybe want to go with the more popular competition prep coaches.
Right. Sure. Any additional thoughts, James?
Yeah. I think, like I said, I think a coach can be really good for people in contest prep, just because, especially when you start getting really low body fat. I mean, your brain just stops working. It's just. Things can be confusing, and if you have a good, solid evidence-based coach, it can also just keep you from possibly doing crazy shit, So there's just, I've had clients come to me. I've had a few competitors come to me, mainly female competitors. I've had a couple. I didn't coach them for very long, just because they had other reasons they had to stop coaching, that weren't really related to. Just like they had other stuff come up in their life, they had to stop coaching. But
sure,
I know one lady came to me and she was like, she had done a fitness competition before, and she told me the stuff that her previous coach had done. And it was just insane stuff. She was like way overtraining, and just drastically low calories, and it was just her contest prep. Contest prep is not supposed to be fun, but hers was just extra miserable. And and she was just doing really crazy stuff that was just I would deem pretty harmful. And so that's why I think a coach, especially a good solid science-based coach, can do people good, because it can keep you sometimes from getting involved in crazy stuff that may sound like it may, because there's some stuff out there it sounds like it makes sense, but if you don't have like a deeper understanding of physiology, you know, you may not be able to see through some of the problems with it, you know. So
yeah, if I can add, it was I've always had a problem a week and a half or a week before a show with water retention. Okay, so I think it was the last time I went to Vegas, maybe about 4 years ago or maybe 3 years ago. I was going to try to get my IFBB Pro card, and this was insane to me because I was totally glute ripped. I was just ready to rock and roll. And then it was the weekend before, and that Saturday I looked a little bit less glute ripped, or maybe that Friday, and then the next day a little bit less, and then Sunday I was like, I'm putting on body fat. How am I putting on body fat? And this was about 4 years ago, and it was a physical impossibility. So of course I said, let me just lower the calories, let me increase the cardio. And as I did that, it got worse, and I looked like I was putting on more fat and more fat. My hamstrings went away, my glutes went away, and I was just like, how? I mean, I promise, I was like a few days I was doing like 900 calories, weighing like 143 pounds, and I upped my cardio, I upped me doing swimming, because it was just like, how is this possible? How am I putting on body fat? To the point where I went to Vegas with cankles. I mean, I had water swollen actually on my foot. The hamstrings, all the detail, kind of just all that hard work, and it just didn't make sense to me. Now, of course, after that, I went into muscle, the 3DMJ forum, and I went into body recomposition. And I think it was Alberto Nunez that had given me a paper, and he said, hey, you know, that happens to a lot of my competitors. This is what it could be. That a lot of people don't understand, but it sounds, and in a competitor's mind, it sounds crazy and counterintuitive. Like if you just relax for like 2 or 3 days from the cardio, maybe put some calories back in, then you'll get then you'll drain some of that water. And so the next show that I did, maybe like a year later, I did a local show, and when it started, that's what I did. I just held off a little bit, and it rose my calories up, and it went away like within like a couple of days. And so this last show I did with James, everything was just, you know, laughable. My whole contest was laughable, all the way up until the last. I think it was like 2 weeks, and I really almost effed myself again. And me and James had this talk where I got a little scared, and it's just the nature of it. I mean, I was really ripped, but I wanted to be more ripped, so I slightly dropped my calories by about like 250 calories. I slightly brought my my cardio up. Of course, I told James a few days after that I did that, and it started up again. It started up again, and so I spent a whole day saying, okay, let's think logically, and I had to have a conversation with myself and be like, because at first my first initial reaction was, let's just hit the cardio a little bit harder. But then I had to tell myself, hey dummy, like that's not, remember, this is not what we do. And so I had to talk with James. I was like, hey, look, this is what I did. I'm going to raise the calories. And he was like, yeah, man, let's get those calories back up, especially based off of your past experiences. And I brought my calories back up to, I believe, 1,900 to 2,000 calories. I brought the cardio back down, and like per day, I started getting leaner and leaner and leaner, and all that water just started going away again, to the point where when I was on stage, I was freaking just flawless. But that's also why you would need a coach, you know, just for something like that, those kind of irrational talks that you're giving yourself.
Yeah, I think contest prep is certainly, you know, I could understand why you wouldn't want a coach for maybe just trying to get beach lean or just putting on some muscle. But I think just, if for no other reason than like the mind tricks that happen when you get contest lean, it just seems like it would be almost necessary to have somebody helping you out.
Mm-hmm.
So I did want you kind of reference the weighted vest thing that you've been doing, and I have seen that kind of blown up a little bit recently. What was the idea behind that? I mean, obviously it's adding weight to you. The idea would be, increasing caloric expenditure, but are you wearing it all the time? Can you just kind of go into what you did and what you guys were trying to accomplish with it?
Yeah, how it actually initially started was just as the years go by, I always take a look back at jobs that I've had. So whenever when I was 18 years old, I was a cart boy. So I worked at Sam's Club or Costco, and like my whole job was just to stay outside. And we actually didn't have that machine to just push all the carts. And so me and my buddies, we would stack like 30 carts together, and I would push it, and I would push it so hard that my quads would just burn. And after they burn, I'd just get up, take a few breaths, and just keep on pushing even more. And this is whenever I was young and starting to work out. Of course, I never worked out legs, and I didn't have big legs. But that was my job 5 days a week for 6 hours. And my legs blew up because I worked there for about 10 months. And that's all I did. And my quads just got so big. And then when I added squats, they got even bigger. So I always thought that was really interesting, especially with the whole term of overtraining. Then my next job I worked at a paper mill where I had to actually grip with my hands and pull down very heavy pieces of paper, where the first week I couldn't even do it. I felt so weak and I almost couldn't even perform the job, but I eventually got used to it and I started developing pretty big forearm muscles. Now, of course, years after I stopped doing that, my forearms went back down. But as I started getting towards the latter half of my bodybuilding career, I always had that in my mind that I wanted to try I had in my mind that I either wanted to try weighted vest or I wanted to go and get a part-time job at Costco and be a cart boy while going into prep. So at least I can get paid 4 hours a day as a part-time job to do cardio and to hold on to my quad size as I lose weight. And so I also told myself that every time that I'm at my peak off-season weight, I'm at my strongest, obviously. My legs are at the biggest looking. And I would always play this game with myself saying, right now, today, if you can just now strip off the body fat, I wonder how my actual physique would look. If you can just strip off the body fat as we speak right now, as me walking around as a 175-pound man with maximum amount of calories and my maximum strength. But no, it's a process that we have to do a diet. So I was telling James that there was two reasons why I did the weighted vest. I wanted to do it to be able to continue to eat the same amount of calories, but I wanted to at first just hold on to my quad size. I do not like my body to weigh 175 pounds and then for it to eventually walk around at 140 pounds. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I mean that's a significant amount of weight loss. And if you're already giving your body a deficit for 5-6 months, and it's also on a constant walking around with weight like 25-30 pounds less weight, then you can imagine some muscle atrophy. Okay, no matter how good your program is. So I specifically wanted to do it to hold on to my quad size. Okay, I always wanted to walk around as 175 pound. Now, as a plus and as a bonus, then I can also keep the calories. Now, when we started doing this initially, and I started losing some weight, and I think it was about maybe it was about 8 weeks, or maybe about 8 or 12 weeks, I decided to actually increase the weighted vest. So I haven't weighed 190 since like my bro days. So when I used to like dirty bulk. So I haven't weighed anything past 175 in over like 6 or 7 years. So I started slowly adding on weight as I kept losing weight. So I got all the way up to, I believe, James, like 185, 192. But let's just say like 185. That was where I pretty much went up to. So my body has never weighed 185 or ever felt, my quads have never felt 185 pounds on me before. So as I'm losing more weight, I'm actually putting more weight on. So the gap in between what I actually weigh was about 50 pounds. So that's what I started to do. And I was even trying to spark even a little bit, if not fuller with my quadriceps, even a little bit of hypertrophy, even while dropping, because my calories were always 2,300 calories. And I've taught, and based off of me being a 150, 145 pound male, 140 pound male, and me talking to other people who are my height, who are bantamweights, who have also dieted, we all tend to be at the towards the end of the competition when we're about 142 pounds. We all tend to be at about 1150, 1250 calories. Okay, that's because we're already a small person. I mean, we're just trying to get that little bit off. But in this scenario, I was at 2,300 calories the entire time up until like the last, maybe like out of 7 months of dieting, I believe, 6 months. We dropped it down from 23, maybe down to 19.
How much? So you started about 175 at the start of this, right?
Actually, 160, 167, 165,
Okay.
167, yeah.
And how often are you wearing? Is this like all day?
Yeah, it was, I think it was 85% of the day, 95% of my steps.
Wow. Okay. Now, this was your first time doing this, right? Did you get the idea from James, or how did that work?
No, okay, so when I first did it, I got a lot of people that were telling me like, well, I thought about that. Well, I thought about that before too. What? And it's a very natural thing to think of. Okay,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'm pretty sure a million people in the world have thought about it, but no one's actually executed it. And I don't think anybody has also thought about actually adding weight. I think people
Right.
have thought about maybe just holding on to your current weight wherever you happen to be as you're dieting down. But I don't think no one ever thinks to actually play the opposite role and like go the other way and actually increase weight as you're dieting down. So
Sure.
yeah, I just naturally thought about it, but I mean that's just something that you're naturally gonna think of when you start trying to when you've been bodybuilding for a while and you're just trying to outside of not doing drugs, you start just thinking of like, man, what else can I do to maybe spark something? And when it comes to overtraining, I always have these thoughts when it comes to overtraining. Like, well, you don't overtrain when you eventually gain weight. So, like, whenever I used to jump from 140 to 200 pounds, like way back in the day, my body adjusted per week with the amount of weights that I would gain. So it would be really, it would be able to catch up with it without having inflammation in my quads or anything like that. So I did it the same way. Like every 2 weeks, I would just like add 5 pounds to the vest or to my total body, so that I wouldn't get any inflammation. Everything would be okay. And I would also put it throughout my body. So I put ankle weights around my belly, since that's where I would normally gain body fat, around my upper body, even on my wrist. And so, yeah, I just started doing it that way.
Gotcha. And James, were you kind of surprised with the results from that? Or, I mean, did you have any expectations going into it?
Um, well, I really had no idea what would happen. Uh, I knew there'd be an energy expenditure benefit to it, but really what I was not anticipating, and this is what led me to actually write a big research review piece on it, because Eric was telling me how good he was feeling and how he wasn't like getting the temptations to binge and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, I kept thinking, I mean, obviously, I think it helps that he doesn't have to keep dropping his calories, but I kept thinking, but there's got to be something else going on. And I had heard about this research that had been done on rodents, where they had implanted weights into the abdomens of these rodents. And when they did this, the rodents spontaneously lost their appetite and ate less until their total body weight was back to whatever its original weight was.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And so I really took a good look at that research, and it was really interesting. And what the researchers determined is that there appears to be something in the osteocytes, the bone cells, that actually sense loading and give feedback to your brain in terms of appetite regulation. So it actually, so by having this external weight, at least in these rodents, the osteocytes sense the increased load and then would feed back on the brain, basically tell the rodents to eat less. Like the rodents just spontaneously started eating less when they were implanted with these weights. And so I started to figure that I think something similar was happening with Eric, because he was wearing a weighted vest the vast majority of the day, and because he spends most of his time standing and ambulating around, he doesn't have like a desk job where he's sitting down most of the day.
Right.
I figured he was getting a similar impact in the sense that his skeleton was sensing the load, and his skeleton had no idea that he was losing body fat because he had this added external load, which was feeding back on his brain and basically tricking his brain that maybe he hadn't lost as much. Basically tricking his brain that he hadn't lost the weight. And so I think that's why Eric did so well with the prep. Now, obviously, you do get to a point where your body fat gets so low that you still start to get some of the symptoms that you typically would get, and that's just symptoms of low body fat. It doesn't matter how many tricks you have in your book. You're eventually, when you get that lean, it's going to start to affect you. But I will say overall, that was the biggest surprise to me was the impact on his appetite and just on him psychologically and all that stuff. I actually think that's probably the biggest benefit of wearing the weighted vest. I do think there's an energy expenditure benefit, but I don't think the energy expenditure benefit is nearly as big as the actual benefit towards appetite regulation and things like that. So.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I did not know that about the osteocytes. That's do you think you could send me that paper when we're done here?
Yeah, I can do that.
That'd be awesome. So one thing that I had seen brought up in regard to this is, I think in the last maybe a year or two, there's been some studies on the constrained energy model. And basically, if I'm remembering it correctly, they were looking at tribes in Africa, and they were expecting that they would have these crazy high, calorie burns, and, to maintain weight, they'd have to be eating more just because of all the activity that they were doing. And they were surprised to find that they were actually burning a similar number of calories as, people in America, and they were really shocked by that. And I guess the idea was that over time, there is a downregulation in metabolism, or not even just NEAT. I've seen people even say that there are like metabolic responses, even as far as decreasing like hormone production or somatic maintenance, things like that. And I've seen people look at the weighted vest experiment and say, well, ultimately your body would then slow down in response. My thought is, if you're just doing it for a contest prep, that's probably not enough time for all those adaptations to occur. Maybe if you're wearing it for life, but I would think if you're doing a 12, 16 week prep, you're just not going to adapt to that quickly. But I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that.
Well, my thought would be is I think I think some people who would argue that are probably misunderstanding the energy expenditure constraint model. Adding a weighted vest is not going to boost your energy expenditure by a huge amount. I mean, it's not. I mean, we're talking. I actually ran the numbers in my research review. I mean, we're talking maybe a couple hundred calories per day, maybe at most. It's not like it's this huge energy switch. So you're not. So by adding a weighted vest, you're not going to bump up into the limits of human energy expenditure. So I would say no matter how long you're weighted the vest, I just don't think that's even going to be an issue. Because Ponser's model basically dictates that when your energy expenditure starts getting up into that 3,500 to 4,000 calorie per day range, that's where you start to see the limits. But unless you're a really heavyweight bodybuilder, you're not going to be bumping into those upper limits anyway of energy expenditure. So, and like I said, the weighted vest isn't going to make a huge difference in terms of overall. It makes a difference, but not that massive of a difference. So I don't think that the energy expenditure constraint model is really going to be a factor with this.
So if you were saying it only is maybe a few hundred calorie difference, but I know, Eric, you were saying that you felt like in the past you might have had to be 1,200, 1,300 calories, and now you're up at 2,000 plus. Where is that difference coming from then?
That was because I was doing 50 pounds, so I was making it ridiculous. Where a lot of clients or a lot of people that I see that tag us in weighted vest, I mean, it's usually like 130 pound woman or 150 pound man just wearing like a 12-pound vest for not the majority of the day. I'm like, I usually, I mean, of course, everyone in my gym sees me wearing a vest. So of course, naturally, everyone goes and buys a vest, even though I tell everybody this is definitely not practical for anything. But one thing I can tell them that, if if you are gonna happen to use some of your steps here on the treadmill, some of my clients will do steps of let's just say 30 or 45 minutes, and they want to put on 15-pound vest, then it'll supercharge that a little bit. You'll burn a little bit more for that 45 minutes. I mean, if you're gonna already be walking on there, then it's not gonna hurt. It's only just gonna give you a little help. But I mean, it's not the magic thing. But I think that's why my calories were a little bit different. Is that I added so much weighted apparel on my body that I only weighed 140, 145 pounds, and I had 100 and my actual weighted vest had me at 185 to 192 pounds.
Right.
Yeah, and I also want to add to that too. With him adding the weight, I think that's quite a bit different from trying to increase your energy expenditure via exercise and everything like that, which I think is more applicable to the energy expenditure constraint model. When people start trying to do huge amounts of exercise, things like that, they end up compensating through NEAT reduction and all that other stuff. But the thing is with Eric, when you're adding the weighted vest and all of his, other than weight training, all of his activity was very low intensity. He was just doing basically 10 to 12,000 steps a day or whatever.
Yeah, usually about 10.
Yeah. So, which is really low intensity. So I think the impact on total daily energy expenditure is going to be different. I think, if you're trying to really boost your energy expenditure with exercise, I think you start to get especially if you're dieting and stuff, you start to get the compensation with NEAT reduction and all that stuff. But if you're doing it with added weight, because the intensity is so low and because of his activity was so low, I think it's a slightly different. I think the impact is different. So.
Last point I would make is you mentioned that it's not super practical, and that's what I would wonder because if you work in a gym and you're the owner of the gym, you can kind of do whatever you want. But I think for a lot of people, if they have a desk job, it's probably not super useful anyway because they're spending 8 to 10 hours just sitting down. But if you're really an employee, probably anywhere, I mean, I doubt you could wear a 20+ pound vest without it being super obvious.
It depends on what type of vest you get. So I know Eric just kind of got the cheaper version, but you can actually buy some really expensive ones that are really sleek looking that you can actually hide really well. But those are really pricey. I mean, they're like you look at them on Amazon, they're like $250 for one of them or something like that. So
yeah, the cheap ones I bought were so expensive.
Yeah.
Like I bought the cheap one. Yeah, those cheap ones are expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the really expensive. Yeah, there's some really expensive ones that they're very form fitting, and you can put these little tiny weights in them, and you could actually wear clothes over them, and most people it would pretty much not be noticeable, but those ones are really really pricey. So.
While we're on the topic of my actual prep, throughout all the years, I mean, I'm somebody just like any one of my clients. I'm somebody who would have the binges here and there. Sometimes I procrastinate until it was the month of. Then I'd really hone things down. But this was, and it wasn't a main point for me to not binge. This wasn't the quest to not have a cheat meal. This wasn't the quest to just go over. It's just naturally with eating 2,300 calories, with using the weight vest, I just never needed to. I mean, I just, the option could always been there. My hunger levels were it was just really easy. I never was foggy brained. I did 4 bodybuilding shows. I have never been able to do that. I have actually attempted that 3 times in the past maybe 7 years. I've attempted to do a show back to back and always failed because my calories were just too low. You take the handcuffs off me, even though I had planned it. And I've tried this 3 other times, and I'm like, no, F that. I can't. I'm not doing this. I'm clocked out. They're like, but it's just in 2 weeks. I'm like, no, it's like a lot of hours from now. Like I can't survive. Like I'm dying. Like I can't do this. This one, I was just knocking them out and winning first place. I won first place on all of them, and
Wow.
my body looked really great. Didn't do a peak week. I just kind of just walked on in and tanned myself up and got on stage with the 2,300 calories. And even those Saturdays, I didn't do like a peak day. I actually, if anything, I probably did the opposite. I kind of just kept my calories really low for the show, just so at the very end of the day I can go and have a burger with fries and a couple beers. Well, I mean, I drank the whole time, but
Yeah, that's awesome, man. One, I guess, like final point I kind of want to talk to you guys about, and we can go into it as much as you want. Eric, you and I kind of talked about, I think, one on one a little bit about limitations, like genetic limitations that people have, which is always interesting for me to hear from somebody who, at least from what I can tell, I mean, you seem pretty genetically gifted. I mean, you're winning first prize in numerous shows. You look crazy. Um, and a lot of times I find that people who are really gifted or have great genetics, they're more reluctant to admit how much genetics play a role. And oftentimes you find people like, I mean, James, you and I talked about this before, where, I don't think either of us have the best genetics for bodybuilding. And the only way you really find that out is if you really put everything into it. And then even after you put in 10 plus years, you find, oh, wow, I'm still really not doing that great, which of course sucks, but that's the only way you really find out. And if you're genetically gifted, you just assume X person isn't working as hard as I am. But Eric, it doesn't seem like you fall into that camp, and probably in part because you are a coach. And so you've been doing this for so long, you've probably seen people who put, a moderate amount of effort into it and get surprisingly good results, and people who are really trying to kill it and don't get the results you would expect. And I think that's one of the benefits of coaching is you get to see that. But one of the things I kind of wanted to delve into is in the fitness industry, I think a lot of people aren't maybe completely honest about the limitations that some people have. They might, if you were to ask them the question directly, they'll say it. They'll say yes, that of course there's limitations, but then you'll see their posts about how this is what's achievable with dedication. And I mean, I can literally in the last 2 weeks or in the last week, I can think of two examples of, great people. I respect them a lot, but they post a picture and they say, this is what hard work and dedication and good coaching can get you. And it's clear that their athletes who are like 20 years old are complete freaks. So I guess I wanted to hear from your standpoints. Do you think that despite maybe consciously being aware of that, there's still this kind of message out there that everybody can achieve greatness as long as they work really hard?
You want to go, James, or me?
I can go, or if you want to.
Go ahead, James.
Okay.
And then I'll
my comment is like, I do agree. I think sometimes what happens is, and I know Eric doesn't do this, but I know there's other people that maybe, I think sometimes when you say that someone has good genetics, I think someone who does have good genetics, even if they realized how hard they had to, even if they did work really hard, I think some people might take it personally and say, "Oh, what are you saying? I don't work hard?" Mm-hmm. And that's not the case. That's not the case. Like I think Eric's a perfect example of a guy with great genetics and a guy who combines that with extremely hard work, right?
Sure.
So it's like it's not like when you have great. It's not mutual. The two concepts aren't mutually exclusive. You can have great genetics and still be a really hard worker. But I do agree that sometimes there are some people in the industry who have great genetics who really, I think, underappreciate the role that genetics plays. And I think it's because personally maybe it feels to them like you're taking away from the hard work they've done, which you're not. I mean, mm-hmm. You're never taking away from the hard work. It's just that I think what people need to understand, there's a huge amount of survivorship bias in the fitness industry.
Oh, yeah.
For every photo that you see of someone who made an amazing transformation and worked really hard and just looks amazing now and all that stuff, there's a lot of people who have worked just as hard, but you never see their results because maybe they made positive impacts, but because they didn't have the genetics to have really that look, You
Sure.
never see their pictures or anything, and so there's a distortion, I think, of reality because of that survivorship bias, I think. So
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. From first working out, very structurally and, really killing it in the gym. When I'm younger, my joints and my ligaments and my tendons were so much stronger. Now I just feel like I'm just a broken man. But when I was younger, I could do whatever the hell I want and be able to and just completely just massacre everything. And, I got a lot of good gains now from that very first bodybuilding show. Um, in the past 11 years, let's just say 10 years that I've been competing, there's the point of my first competition, and there's 5 years later, which you can see a good difference. And then from that 5 year mark to now, it's a smaller difference. I want to actually say that, we learn to diet better, more efficiency. So that, even the weighted vest, I really think the weighted vest for me, specifically, especially with putting on so much amounts, with so much weight, with still the gradual time, not overloading my body to, inflame my hips or my knees, of like just drastically like putting on 50 pounds. It really had my quads like just biggest it's ever looked. So not only do I feel like my quads were still the same as whenever I started at my full off season, but I feel like it had just the slightest, even fuller look, well, with me just packing on more weight on it. So, and not going down to 1,200 calories, me being at 23 and going down to 2,000 calories. That was very sparing for my muscles, with eating it very well and really kind of just tricking my body. Now I'm interested to see on my off season, what it's like to have weighted apparel on, because you see the funny good thing about my post competition is that I still haven't had a binge to this day. I put myself at 3,000 calories and 31 and 3,200 calories, and I've been like that ever since. Now I know everyone at first was probably, and James, you could probably agree with this too. Everyone was probably looking at me like, "Uh-oh, we have another one of those guys who's going to stay super lean like too long." I'm like, no, I was constantly gaining like a pound every single week, and even right now, James knows that I F with people a lot on Facebook by just saying things, and I'm like going to start my mini cut, and I can already see people being like, "Oh my God, he's already lean." But I mean, the fact is, I'm 20 pounds over contest weight, and it can easily be 25 pounds. But this is 6 months later after my show, and I've been in a surplus ever since, due to the weighted vest. So, but going back to what I was saying is that I don't now want to always just weigh 155 pounds on my quads. So it's almost like an unfair. It's a bonus, and it's an unfair thing. So now I keep the weighted vest on, but only at about 175, and I'm not very meticulous about it. I keep it on for the majority of my steps, like while I'm here training my clients, walking around. I do think that my body is kind of stopping, has stopped the growth as far as musculature, but there are little experiments like this that I don't mind doing, that I feel that will continue to grow. That's out of just progressive overload, structured the best way. I'm even going to do another little experiment with, I forgot what you call this thing. It's the rope. It's where you just pull the rope out of a machine, like a treadmill. So we're going to make one of those where you add weight to it, where I'm doing it for X amount of time per day, 5 days a week, as if that is a job that I now have. With any job that I've had in my past, there's been a little bit of some muscle responding with that. So now, of course, like I said, these things that I do, it's not practical for anybody to do. But I own my own gym, do whatever I want here. So that's something I can bring in and start doing that, and maybe get some good bicep and back lat improvement and growth, where besides that, just conventional, same thing I've been doing for 10, 15 years in the weight room, it's just not going to do anything much more now. So like you said, I think our main thing is to find ways, even if it seems silly to a lot of people, to diet better into a show, to not lose so much or come out very stringy, and or in the off season come up with some things like put on more weighted apparel while you're doing squats now, or just like the rope, progress with that. So those are just wacky things that I'm doing, knowing the reality of, my growth is kind of slowing down now.
Yeah, I think it can be hard because, I mean, I've been lifting for about 14, 15 years now as well. And when you kind of know you're done, it's like, how do I stay motivated, especially if it's, your whole job and career, like in your case. And I think it can come from experimenting with things, I mean, just for no other reason. It's like, well, what else am I going to do? Like, I could just accept nothing's going to change. Or, I mean, it's not like it's hurting you to try these things. You know what I mean? You're
Yeah,
gathering
exactly.
data for yourself. And even if it's like a worse result, okay, now no, not to
Yeah.
recommend that. And you're it sounds like you're pretty objective with it. You're able to say, what, it's not this huge difference if it's only a moderate amount of weight, or I realize it's not practical for everyone. So I think that's a good mindset to have, because like I said, what else are you going to do? And just touching on what you said, James, I think definitely there are a lot of people who, maybe not, I mean, yeah, I would say probably a lot of people who underestimate how much genetics play a role. But I also find it interesting that it's not even like, kind of what I was getting at before, is there are people who realize genetics are a huge role, but I think there's just something in a lot of us where like we could recognize that, and we still often think that like if somebody is less accomplished than us, like we don't want to take their results or their advice or something. It's like even like for me, like obviously I'm very aware of how much genetics matter, because I don't think I have the best genetics for it. And yet inherently, if I saw somebody who was even like worse than me, there might be, it's like subconsciously, I would objectively be able to stand back and say, no, that doesn't make sense. I can look at like, they've been able to coach these people, et cetera. But I think there is that initial thing, especially in lifting, where you think, well, if they're not stronger than me, why am I going to hire them? Or if they're not bigger than me, why am I going to hire them? And of course, we have counterexamples. Eric Helms, he coaches Bryce Lewis. Obviously, Bryce Lewis is way stronger. But I think a lot of people do have that mindset, like, well, if I'm going to be an IFBB pro, I need to find somebody who's even bigger than me, et cetera, et cetera.
I think this actually relates to a discussion I had with Patrick Humphrey a while back. Patrick's not the most genetically gifted guy in the world, and I'm not, and stuff like that. And we made an interesting observation. If anything, I would say sometimes it's actually, like people will choose the best looking bodybuilder or the strongest guy to be their coach, when in reality, sometimes the better coaches are the people who are not so accomplished, because they've had to work so much harder for every little bit. Someone who's genetically gifted, they haven't necessarily had to go through some of the things that
Sure.
someone who's not genetically gifted had to go through. And so sometimes I would say, sometimes that's what makes someone a good coach. That's what makes the non-genetically gifted person a good coach, because they've had to spend so much time gathering so much knowledge and everything, trying to get every little ounce of muscle they could, or just get every little pound or kilogram they could add to that bar that they could. I think there's definitely something going on there. Again, I'm not saying across the board that anyone who is genetically gifted is a bad coach, so I don't want to come across like that. But I would say, like, if you were to average everything out, I would say more often than not, I would say sometimes your best coaches might not be the genetically gifted people, so.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, my obsession with this, a lot of it comes from the fact that I wasn't getting the results I wanted, and so I looked into it more and more. If I got amazing results at the start, I probably would have been like, yep, this is why it works. I'm done. Yeah. And I will admit, I would definitely be that douchey guy that we all hate, who says, no, you're just not working hard enough. Like, I'm sure I would have been that guy. So I think that's probably a good note to end it on. Where can people find more of your stuff, guys?
You can just go to my website, weightology.net. Everything's on there. Everything about me is on there. So
I say just follow me on Instagram and Facebook, because I'm an open book. Everybody who follows me on Instagram knows I put all my stuff out there.
Yep. Awesome, guys. Well, thank you again.
yeah, thanks
All
for
right,
having me.
buddy.